Hi everyone. In this video, I wanted to share a sketchbook practice. This is where I experiment, and you can experiment with materials, mark making, different tools, developing ideas for what you want to do, maybe on canvas afterwards. I use pastels as well. And I started out with a grid to give an idea of the composition. You don't have to make the vase as neurotically as I do, right in the center in the bottom, but somewhat centered is going to be a good idea so it keeps the balance. And the grid also shows how the composition is going to develop. So it'll be on a little bit of an angle. I seem to favor diagonal mostly in terms of my composition, but there are many different composition styles. And I'm just putting some colors down, filling this in. I have a vague idea of the colors I want to use. I think I'm going to go in with some red and yellow for the flowers. So I sort of have a bluish gray here going on for the vase. Experimenting, putting in some background as well, little bit dark there on one spot, but that will even out eventually after, but just to give myself a little bit of background, and so I don't have to go back in and try to do in all the little spaces. And then I'm just using a bit of Willow Charcoal to map out a vague idea of what I want to do. There's going to be a goof, of course. Great place to experiment though and goof up. I'm going to draw in some giant purple bananas. Don't know what I was trying to do there, but you'll see. Oh, here we go. You'll see how this develops, fails, and then I somehow manage to correct it. So that's part of the process as well, learning to correct those mistakes. And I usually have one piece or one part that is going to be more the focal point. So I'm not super sure what that's going to be so far, but I'm going to start filling in the colors. It won't be that indigo violet, whatever that is, leaf, strange banana, but I am going to have one that is probably going to be more focused than other. And then, of course, to balance it out, slowly always thinking about, cool colors, warm colors, bigger shapes, smaller shapes, manufactured sometimes, what I call manufactured shapes. So something that's from a stencil, that's very hard edge, definite shape, and something that's more organic. And I do have more the little greenery at the bottom. I'm using a fan brush here, just something I'm experimenting with, and I really wind up liking the result. It makes, I think asters was the name of the flower I was looking for. So something that's sort of a little bit like asters, sort of very fluffy and just more delicate, smaller. I'm going to go back in again with some orange, darken this, maybe define this shape a little bit more into different sets of flowers. So maybe a little grouping of three. I think I'm putting in some petals there and defining that a little bit as well. You can see how the composition angles up to the right a little bit. So off center to the right is going to be my highest point. And keeping, of course, the bulk of the composition in the middle. I'm going to go in with some, just experimenting here, right? Experimenting with texture, experimenting with marks, seeing what works, what doesn't. It doesn't matter. It's just sketchbook paper. So this is a great place to practice. I'm defining this a little bit more as well. I think at this point, I figured the best way to reduce the indigo was to increase a little bit the flowers around it and sort of cover it up somewhat. I'm using a stippling brush here to maybe do something. Didn't really work. I'm going to give it more shape though, and that's going to help look like you meant to do it, but it will help actually clean it up to have it more defined and to give it more shape. New day, have to let it dry at some point. New day. So I'm going back in, I'm redoing these flowers. I did decide or keep doing the cluster of three, and I'm using more paint. And you saw I used a spatula to create some texture. I'm also increasing that magenta colored flower on the right, upper right, and going back in and touching up the orange as well. Just going layer by layer and defining more and more what the composition is. I'm also using some pastels. I like to use the pastels a lot on the vase, sometimes on the background as well, just to create some marks, create some color, different shading. This, of course, is the blue pastel, and I'm using the paintbrush to spread that around a little bit as well. Also, I'm just going in with some darker shades as well. And just putting a little bit in. That's why I put down the color before, because I don't want to be stuck trying to fill in all the little spaces in between, but I am doing a little bit here just for the sake of realism a little bit. I've also gotten better at focusing and centering it. I get so involved and then I forget that sometimes I'm almost off camera. Sorry about that. Scratching with the end of the brush didn't really work too well. I don't really like that brush either. It's quite moppy. Might be good for something else, but I am covering up the blue a bit, and that's just a Stabilo Woody or a Prismacolor water-soluble pencil, watercolor pencil. I'm using my acrylic markers to define that more. So looks better, looks better, looks like it has a shape and more intention. And I'm just working on that a little bit more to give it more color, just experimenting with textures as well. Giving it sort of more shape and definition. My flowers are abstract. They don't necessarily look like real flowers, but as I'm adding more yellow, I'm also hiding a little bit of the blue, so making it less apparent. It was taking up just, too much space and was becoming a focal point, which I didn't want. I struggled to figure out what I was going to do with this pink flower. Remained a pink blob for a while. Tried drops of paint. Some got, this isn't a big deal. Some wound up on the side, painted over it. It's fine. Learning to correct mistakes and learning what doesn't work and why it doesn't work is also part of practicing doing sketchbook, just doing your practice and your exercises. Exercises? Yeah, let's call them that. Your painting exercises. So learning what you're doing right and learning what works for you and learning what doesn't. And then, of course, as I said, how to correct mistakes. Going in with some more pastels here. It brings it together to have the darker background. It helps the colors show up more, I find. Also because it's blue, so it contrasts somewhat with the yellow and the orange. I'm going to really fuss here to get this blue in as close as possible, using a Q-tip, spreading the pastel as much as I can. I have these fussy moments, but just part of it. Nice to sometimes go slowly and do something more zen. I'm putting on some dots around in the same shade of violet, blue, indigo, some on them, you'll see at the end, and some around. So they've been covered up quite a bit. I'm happy with how it looks now. I'm happy with how they complement the yellow, add a darker value also. I think I took a picture of this at one point and then just put it in a black and white filter to make sure, I had the lighter and darker values pretty much present. And something you don't always notice when it's in color. So they do add a darker value nicely. and they're not as apparent, and they're not competing with that larger yellow flower in the center closer to the top. So one is the highest, and one of the larger ones. Now the blue is a little smaller and a little, just a little lower and off to the side. Adding some more color to the orange, also just using, again, a plastic spatula. Using a little bit of a sponge. Oh yeah, I decided to go in. This is a very fine metal tipped bottle. It's used in crafting sometimes for glue, very small end. And that's how I finally defined the pink flower. And I sort of liked the way it came out. It wasn't too much, wasn't too little, and it made one flower as opposed to making several. I already have the orange that are doing that and the white that are doing that. This I expect. This, hey, if it doesn't work, acrylic, you can just wipe it off, right, with a damp paper towel or a damp rag. I wanted to do some lines or mark making in this just to give it more interest. I know what flower this looks like, but I can't remember the name. Now I'm thinking it's starting to look like an Easter egg, but I know what it is in my mind, and I'll try to find the name of it, like what inspired this. But finally went in with a darker shade of green, and it looked quite nice. It's not too obvious. The first shade was just too obvious. So that's about it. Went over the green with the pastels. Oh yeah, I'm going back in again and doing a little bit more, just finishing this up. The green has a lot of either the Stabilo Woody in a sort of lime green shade I have, some of the Prismacolor watercolor soluble pencils, the pastels as well. It gives them texture, and it's interesting because from far you don't really see it as much, but from up close it does have a lot of interest. So something to see far away, something to see up close. This was when I was recording and explaining it. See, oh yeah, the composition is going diagonally. I decided to voice it over because it's still a challenge I find to work and speak at the same time. So just some up close shots. You can see the pastel marks, the pencils that are used. Some smudging, some marks are more defined. Same thing for the background as well. These are my toned down purple leaves and just a few more up close shots. And I do take notes on the back to remember what I did, what worked, what didn't work in all this. So hope this was helpful. Hope this inspired you. Let me know what you think, and thanks for watching.